that's a problem.
Sure.
And I'm angry about it. And when I went to film for Beyond Skinwalker, the directors, I think they wanted a different reaction than what they got. That radio experiment that you see where I'm on
Yeah.
That was insane. And what's really cool about that whole segment,
that's where it responded. You would talk and
they didn't show everything that happened, which surprised me. Why didn't you show everything? For season 3, I can't talk a lot about it because it hasn't come out yet, but I talked my sister into going back with me to the ranch. So she goes back for the first time and they repeat that. We get interesting results, different, but interesting. And then while this is going on, in the old part of the house where they have the old crystal radio and the old time radios, they're getting clicks that they can't explain. And they sent it to Travis Taylor. It's like almost a Morse code.
Okay. Well, Katie Paige, thank you for joining us today. I was really happy to be able to get you on the podcast. I didn't realize that you were local, and it was such a shock to be able to get you here in person, so thank you for attending.
Well, thanks for having me. It's fun being here.
Absolutely. I have a bio. I'd like to read that, so that way everyone who doesn't know you, they get to know exactly who you are. So Katie Paige has personal ties to High Strangeness Ranch in Colorado, now known as Rocky Mountain Ranch. In UFO folklore, it was known as the Clearview Ranch and predates the infamous Skinwalker Ranch by over a decade. This motivated her interest in ufology, to find answers to her experiences and to uncover the truth about what was happening there. She is CEO of Rocky Mountain Ranch Research and is the co-host of the UAP Studies Podcast, hosted by Jason, how do you say that?
Gilmat.
Mm-hmm. Okay, didn't want to slaughter that. And Dr. Michael Glosson. Katie has been seen on History Channel's Beyond Skinwalker, The Unexplained with William Shatner, Travel Channel's UFO Witness, Gaia's Beyond Belief with George Norrie, Small Town Monsters on the Trail of UFOs, Night Visitors, and UFOs Revisited, as well as Ron James' film Accidental Truth. Katie conducts independent investigations and research through her Rocky Mountain Ranch Research Foundation. She has been a presenter at several conferences. She has appeared on many radio shows and podcasts, including Coast to Coast with George Knapp, Chinwag with Paul Giamatti, and more. Katie is the author of Letters of Love and Light, 4 decades of UFO encounters, experiences, and sightings shared with ufologist R. Leo Sprinkle, Ph.D. And she is writing her second book, The Rocky Mountain Ranch, Crafts, Cattle, Cryptids, and Cover-Ups. And Katie holds a Bachelor of Science in Visual Communication. Katie, that's quite the bio. You have a very unique background, but you have a lot in it. So I think that's really cool. So I'd like to start it off, Rocky Mountain Ranch. So I went, in preparation for this interview, I went and watched the episode of Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. And I didn't realize that there was basically a Colorado version, but according to this, I mean, it predates any of the high strangeness at Skinwalker. So tell me what goes on up there at Rocky Mountain Ranch.
Right. So, I mean, for me, my older sister, my mom actually worked for United Airlines in the Denver Tech Center as a key punch operator there.
Okay.
And she started dating a gentleman that had this property out in Elbert County, Colorado. And this is mid to late 70s. So I'm dating myself a little bit, but I was a young girl at the time. And my sister and I and my mother would drive back and forth to the ranch and sometimes spend weekends on the ranch. Every time we visited this property, it's in the small town of Kiowa.
Okay.
Unusual things were happening. I mean, we were hearing, so I'm, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old during these years, and I'm hearing the adults kind of whisper about animal mutilation deaths and police being called and just a lot of unusual things, but they didn't tell us. I don't think they wanted to frighten the kids, right? Too much. But we were experiencing our own unique things that were going on. So my sister moves to Wyoming at 11. Fast forward, you go through life, you graduate high school, went through college, had a family, raised kids, did all that. But these questions still remain. Like, what was all that happened on the ranch property? Well, we were threatened and warned to never talk about what was happening out there. And so for me...
Who threatened you?
Well, it sounds crazy, and we'll get to this a little bit, but there was this disembodied electrical sounding voice, which I tend to believe now through my research that we know that there was a military presence out on this property.
Okay.
And, there's questions that they were maybe conducting MK Ultra kind of things, experiments out there. And I learned of a technology or a experiment they were calling plasma ball technology that they were experimenting with, like pumping sounds out at the battlefield. Like, so you can put a human voice sounding. And when I played this back, a plasma ball voice sound, it sounded a lot like this disembodied electrical voice that we heard out there. So my mother told me never to talk about it. Her boyfriend, Jack, told us never to talk about it. So me and my sister kind of kept this, to ourselves. But it was pretty frightening at the time, that all this was happening. So again, I just kind of kept it in the back of my mind, never really talked about it. And, as my kids grew and I got more interested in the paranormal and ufology in general, I joined Colorado MUFON, kind of worked my way up through MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network. I became Colorado MUFON state director. But early on, I picked up this book right here called Hunt for the Skinwalker, written by George Knapp and Colm Kelleher. And in this book, there's a chapter called Other Hotspots. And I started reading about a ranch in Colorado. And I'm like, oh my goodness.
There you go.
This has to be the ranch of my childhood. And they mentioned 3 Ph.D.s that were out investigating at the time, which was Dr. Leo Sprinkle, Ph.D. And that's where this my book came out, Letters of Love and Light. What happened is I went to the university archives in Laramie, Wyoming, the Heritage Center, to pull the information about the ranch. And I got lost in over 72 boxes of letters that people wrote to Dr. Sprinkle from around the world. And for 3 years, I drove back and forth and I'd take pictures of all these letters. And then I organized them into chapters because, it was amazing. And Dr. Leo kept all his response letters. So I kind of got to see how he was thinking, like in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and got to, because he was a well-known hypnotist and he was a psychologist for the university. So he worked with a lot of experiencers and a lot of professionals, so I just got lost in all that and organized them into different chapters on craft description, ET descriptions, letters from children, which was really cool. I don't know. It just became this big labor of love that I did. But back to this.
Well, real quick, I'd like to ask, so in that book right there, what was the most convincing thing that you heard in a letter? Or, what was the most amazing one?
I love the Francis E. Warren. So Francis E. Warren is a Air Force base out in Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Okay.
And on a couple of different occasions, but the ones in the book are their earliest accounts of a mass sighting with radar data, police officers reporting this, and multiple witnesses. And this went over a 2-day span. And then come to find out, a recent witness that grew up in Cheyenne, really just right across from the base, there was another big wave that happened in the 80s. So this has happened a few times in Francis E. Warren. And what I think is interesting, too, about that, I don't know if you recall the massive drone sightings back in northeastern Colorado.
I don't think so.
You don't remember this? So there was a big wave, just like the New Jersey drones.
Sure.
In northeastern Colorado, of these mysterious drones. So if you just Google mysterious drones in northern Colorado.
And when was that?
This was in 2000, was it 2020, 1920. I think the end of 2019, was the end of 2019 into early 2020.
Okay.
Yeah, so pretty recent. And Colorado Bureau of Investigations was involved and all this. It was never solved, just kind of like the New Jersey drones. But I do think there was a Francis E. Warren connection to those drones. So that was interesting. But in this book, they mentioned Dr. Leo Sprinkle, Dr. John Durr, and Peter Van Arsdale. John Durr was a seismologist. And for me and my family, we were just shocked that anybody knew anything about this at all.
Sure.
And from this time of purchasing this book, it's just been, a rabbit hole of taking me all sorts of places. I found out Linda Moulton Howe. She got.
I've seen her on Ancient Aliens, right?
Yeah, she got her start out here in Colorado as an investigative journalist and did a lot of work on the mutilations that were occurring out there in Elbert County at the time, mid to late 70s. And so for me, it's been just, why was there a military presence there? What are these animal mutilations? What is that about? Then there's the whole phenomenon of the choppers and the chopters, these mysterious blacked out helicopters that were so prevalent back in Elbert County at the time. This is a fabulous thing. I have a PDF. If anybody goes to Rocky Mountain Ranch Research.org, I will send you the PDF of this. It's really fascinating to read it. So it's just been question after question after question, and when John Schuessler, who is one of the founding fathers from MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, he bestowed upon me the original briefing document of everything that was occurring out there in Elbert County.
No kidding.
Yeah. So it's just been a matter of which came first, the chicken or the egg, the unusual high strangeness things that were going on there, or the Black Access military projects and all the secret stuff that was going on. And I really think both were happening at the same time.
Very interesting. Well, and stepping back when it comes to the drones, right? Like, so we heard about the ones in New Jersey, like you brought up, and people are shooting at them. People are like, what the heck are those? We don't know if it's China. We don't know if it's ours. We don't know if it's something that's out of this world or high strangeness. I did find it interesting that President Trump recently came out and said it's nothing to worry about. We have it under control. We know what it is. But I don't recall him ever saying exactly what it was or anything like that. Do you remember him saying anything?
I think he just basically said they were testing, or scanning, but for what and who and why. And then we bring in the manifesto of the Las Vegas Tesla truck.
Oh, yeah, from Colorado Springs?
From Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
And that manifesto, which is interesting because he mentioned some things in there that sound legit that he shouldn't maybe know about. And if you've noticed, we don't hear anything about this story in the media. It was talked about for 24 hours and buried.
Sure.
And so I'm like, I think there's more to the New Jersey drones than what we're being told. They probably know what they are, but, again,
yeah, I'm
pretty skeptical that we're hearing the whole story. We're just getting part of the story.
Well, and I think I'm jumping ahead of myself real quick, but I got to ask, we all know that the government knows something. We don't know what it is. We don't know, if they have a crash retrieval program. We don't know a lot of things, but I think we can all agree they know more than they're letting on. Why do you think it is that they refuse to disclose anything? I mean, it seems like everything even going on in Congress, I followed that very closely. And I'm probably a lot like you, was very hopeful. I'm like, man, this is going to lead to something. And then before too long, they're like, oh, we've checked, we found ourselves that there's nothing wrong and we're, nothing is going on there. And it's like, well, I don't believe you if you're checking yourself. You know what I mean? So why do you think that they're kind of keeping it a secret? Yeah,
I think there's multiple reasons. It's not just a simple, clear-cut reason. I think there's a huge liability issues. In looking at these programs that perhaps are out on the ranch and these other locations too, I mean, there were people injured, people that were unwittingly part of these Black Access projects out of state hospitals, things like this that, if the truth got out as to some of these programs and what they were doing to people and communities and families, that's a problem. It's also a problem if, they don't know what's flying around our skies and they're going to admit that they don't know. And
sure,
that's a problem. So, of course, a lot of these back engineer technologies, and I do believe there was a crash at Roswell, and we can get into that, why I believe that later.
Yeah.
But a lot of this technology went into the private sector, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, General Electric, and on and on and on. They did this for several reasons, right? We can't FOIA to get this information out. So it's kept and held secret there. And it's so compartmentalized. So maybe, Lockheed has this and Northern has this and this has that. And of course, you always have to follow the money, the technologies, and we want to keep an upper hand on our, enemy. So I think there's just multiple reasons.
Sure. Well, and I do find it interesting how you're talking about how everything is separated and one hand doesn't talk to the other, because that's exactly what Bob Lazar was talking about, right? Like one person worked on this part of the UFO, someone else worked on something else, and they didn't come together, so you could never have the full picture, right?
That's right.
So let me just ask you, I mean, here you are researching UFOs. It sounds like it's a very deep passion from what you experienced when you're young and it carried throughout your life. I mean, what do you think they are?
I think so there's some things that took me a long time. I tend to come in, I'm a documents person. I come in very skeptical a lot of the times. I have a lot of distrust for good reasons. But like, for example, like the cryptid world, the Bigfoots and all that took me a long time to kind of to go, oh, there's probably something to that too. The abduction phenomenon, all that. So for me, it's been so many years of asking myself questions like the probability of another intelligence making it to planet Earth. What is that likely? If so, what would they do? Would they abduct people? Travis Walton, I know him personally. He had a 1975 abduction out of Snowflake, Arizona, where he was missing. He, I feel like it impacted his whole life. And I believe Travis, something happened to Travis and happened to other people as well. So at the end of the day, it just came down to, yeah, something's happening with these people. That being said, the vast majority of like what Colorado MUFON would get in for UFO reports, 90+% of them we can identify. So there's a lot of misidentification out there. But that leaves, 10% that you're like, is this just our back engineer technology and it's us playing around there, or are they unknowns? What blows my mind, though, and what keeps me going, yeah, there has to be something to this, and we are seeing UFOs, UAP. Just a couple of weeks ago, we were back in Laramie at the Heritage Center, and Richard Haynes was another investigator, and he solely focused on pilots, Air Force pilots, military pilots, commercial pilots, private pilots, and there's boxes upon boxes upon boxes of these incredible reports with multiple witnesses. So you're like, okay, there's unknown things flying around our skies. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that brings us back to the ranch, right? I mean, here we are. What is it about the Rocky Mountain Ranch or Skinwalker Ranch? I mean, why is this activity focused? I mean, it's just very unique because when I think of a ranch, it's a plot of land. You've got a home, you've got some animals. Is it the cattle mutilations part that they're focused on, or why do you think it's targeted?
Well, a lot of these high strangeness locations have similarities that kind of tie them together. Interesting enough, many of them are near military installations, but they're all really highly magnetic areas. So if you go to the United States geographical maps, you can see like in Sedona, Arizona, and Skinwalker, and the Rocky Mountain Ranch, and there's a ranch in Missouri. They all ping the charts as being highly magnetic locations. A lot of them have water features or aquifers underneath rivers and streams. So there's water connections, and then geologies are pretty similar. So quartz crystals, gold, these kind of things. So you have mines. So for my research, I'm just seeing these kind of common things, and I don't know if it's attracting the phenomenon or it allows us to interact with the phenomenon more, but there's a thinning of a veil or of some kind that's happening in these locations. And what's fascinating in this next book that Colm Kelleher and George Knapp put out is Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. And this is the book that really ties in the hitchhiker phenomenon. They call it the hitchhiker, which is a lot of the paranormal type of things that go on at these locations as well. And for me as a little girl, at the time I was living off Arapahoe Road and I-25 in Walnut Hills. Mm-hmm. And I went through Cherry Creek school districts from kindergarten to senior. So, but I was experiencing things at the house. So I was compartmentalizing these different events in my personal life. I was seeing shadow figures, a lot of paranormal types of things with the lights and like ghostly kind of things happening for me. And I was terrified. Always slept with big sister kind of thing.
Sure.
And it wasn't until I picked up this book that I realized that in these high strangeness locations, with these commonalities of the high magnetism, all those things we talked about, the water, all that, just like at the Stanley Hotel, you have that. You have more paranormal things going on at these locations. So it was just not only UAPs and UFOs and orbs, but one of the first things reported on the ranch were these strange hums and bangs under the ground, just like the Taos hum. So then I started researching on the Dulce base and different bases and underground things. Were they tunneling underground? Were they going from like NORAD through Colorado Springs through Elbert County to, at the time it was Stapleton. It wasn't DIA, but early on we knew DIA would be out there. So you have to tie in these conspiracy theories a little bit too. Are there tunnels underground? Things like that.
That's fair. Yeah, there's supposed to be, I think the Illuminati is under DIA,
That's
if I'm not
right.
mistaken.
Yeah. Don't even get me started down that, because then we go into the whole San Luis Valley, Crestone, Mount Blanca. There's just so much to all of it.
Man, you got the 411 on everything, huh?
Yeah.
When you said the hum, so when I watched your episode of Beyond Skinwalker, one of the investigators, when he was talking with the family that's out there, there was a hum going on behind them that it was kind of interesting because the father, the person who owned the ranch,
Greg.
Yeah. Okay. The investigator said, "Have you ever heard that before?" And he said, "Well, not that one."
Yeah.
And it was a very weird way that he answered that. But I take it you probably watched that episode. Is that the hum that you experienced?
It's very similar to that. Yes.
Okay.
And like you, so when I filmed for Beyond Skinwalker, the first time I went back to the ranch was with cameras rolling. And you can imagine, for me, the anticipating, I've been researching this for a lot of years, never been back. I had left a note before COVID hit to the family that was living there, and I put it in their box. And then COVID hit, and we were all on lockdown for a couple of years. And I didn't know if they knew all of this stuff about their home, and they've been living there over 30 years. And I didn't want to just call them up and go, "Hey, by the way, all this stuff happened there." I mean, some of it's pretty frightening. So, I wanted to wait till we could go out and meet face to face and have lunch or something. And then I heard from Beyond Skinwalker, and they learned of the ranch, and the rest is history. So when I'm meeting Greg and Nicole and Chris, and unfortunately Chris passed away after season 1.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah, it was awful. Super wonderful woman, so sweet. But with cameras rolling, we're sitting in their garage, and I'm like, here's the history. And we shared for a couple hours. So you film for a week to get it down to a 44-minute episode. So I don't know what's going to make the episode until I see it, just like you guys.
Sure.
And so much happened. Well, number one, I don't know if I was happy or not happy that things happened, because I'm like, what if nothing's been going on for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years?
Sure.
So when things interacted, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's still going on. Now that hum was interesting to me, because I was like, how do they not hear all this? And then they're there with cameras, and all of a sudden it's humming.
Yeah.
Like, it made me question that a little bit. And so I was always kind of on high alert and looking. I was like, are they staging stuff? Because I don't want to be tricked. Like, this is my life. This is my research. I don't want to go be fooled by this show. But I mean, it just seemed like on the up and up. It really did. It really, honestly, it really did.
Well, I was going to say, because I think I felt a lot like you. Like, you know what? I'm a true believer. I'm actually an experiencer. And so I've seen things as well, but so I don't need convincing, right?
Yeah.
Like, I know what I've seen and I know what I believe. But that being said, when I watched The Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch and Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, there are things that just seem way too coincidental. And I'm like, okay, they want content for their show, but are they trying to massage the numbers or massage what's happening?
Right.
So, but you're saying there was none of that. It was all legitimate.
Not that I witnessed. Now, I'm not saying they didn't, because I was on kind of like, here's the thing. If I find out that ever happened, I'd be angry about it. I would be like, this is my experience, my life, my research, and I would be mad. But I did have that thought from time to time with different things. And I do understand. And when you go in to do a show like this, you have to understand, at the end of the day, it's entertainment, and they have to make a cohesive show going from, Hunt for the Skinwalker, to Beyond Skinwalker. So there's things that I experienced out on this ranch that we filmed about, and different things like this mysterious disappearing weird box.
A box.
A box. We'll get into the boxes.
Oh,
and so they filmed all about the boxes, and I'm like, well, we're going on season 3, and the boxes haven't even been mentioned, but it doesn't tie into the whole theme of the show. So I think that's kind of interesting that there's even more that's happening that they're leaving out just because they want to make a cohesive show that's entertaining. And the biggest thing that happened on season 1 that disappointed me, they brought in a remote viewer by the name of David Morehouse.
Okay.
And he's a well-known professional remote viewer, trained by the government and that. And so they ended up doing the biggest remote view on the ranch. Back from the night of that disembodied electronic voice, that's what the remote viewers viewed. They had over 70 remote viewers from several different countries. They ended up with over 3,000 data points and responses from these remote viewers on the ranch property. So David Morehouse gave us, it was almost a 2-hour presentation on all the results from that experiment. It was the biggest remote view done in this country ever, even for CIA, FBI. And I was like, it was done right there on the ranch. And my jaw was on the floor. And I'm thinking the same thing, like with the hum, like, how could they be this accurate? From the box, the mysterious box, many remote viewers viewed this, and it had electricity coming off of it, and these different ET beings that were spotted on the ranch property, the military presence, the copters. I mean, they just hit on everything down the line. Even the 5 kids, which would have been the 3 boys and me and my sister, the 5 kids on the property, all these things. And then it didn't make the episode.
You're kidding.
They made a 7-minute little bonus episode. So if you Google now on YouTube, you can put in Rocky Mountain Ranch David Morehouse, and there's this bonus clip that they made, and you can watch it. It's really fascinating. And they did get David Morehouse back in for season 2. So if you watch episode 5 in season 2, David Morehouse, they do a light touch on that. But he went deep in that, and they only just touched the surface on what they found. But it blew my mind. It was
that's really interesting. I wonder what their criteria is to make the cut.
Yeah.
Just because it's I would find that fascinating just to check it out. But I guess something that I find I have question marks about is, again, going back to the secrets of Skinwalker Ranch. I watch it, I see the experiments that they do, and I don't know, they do stuff and I'm like, okay, well, it doesn't seem very scientific, or what are they trying to achieve there? And so one of the things that I kind of chuckled at, not saying it's wrong, right? I mean, you got to get data points, but they're like, man, how do we get it to talk to us? Okay, let's shoot rockets at it. And I was like, that's a very American way of attacking that problem. And they claim that they got, a response, or they saw things in the sky. But at the same time, I guess, so my question for a researcher would be what is the best way to investigate these things? I mean, obviously witnesses, you're getting testimony on what people are seeing, but outside of that, I mean, what do you think?
Yeah. What's interesting about, so the very first rocket on season 1, it was back behind the ranch house, and it was the smaller rocket, and they were like, we're going to poke the hornet's nest. Just like you said, okay, we're here. We want to talk to you. Yep. But here's the fascinating thing to me personally on this. So there's a crew, there's the rocket crew. I called them the rocket guys, right? Okay. And and I can't remember the guy's name, but he had personal experience throughout his life. And what I've noticed, there's just certain commonalities, and they tend to run in families, people that are connected into this phenomenon per se. And so I like researching, why are certain people more affected than others, even within own families, but you'll see a tradition like grandmother might have had an experience, or certain, I see a lot of Irish, people with a lot of Irish, and
the drinking.
Yeah. For whatever reason, I don't know why genetically they'll have more experience than other folks.
Okay.
And then it's been studied. Same with people who disassociate. whether it's from meditation. Trauma is a big one. I see a lot of that commonality. Also, people who have near-death experiences like that. Anything that we do that we kind of remote viewers, we leave our bodies, it seems like we connect into something. Those types of people will have more experiences. But this rocket guy that was out there when we're poking the hornet's nest, all of a sudden, well, first of all, him and I both hear these large wings flapping in the tree line, like a huge, like pterodactyl kind of sounding thing where we're both like, what was that?
Yeah.
Right. And what's interesting, there's reports of these things from back in the day. So we're both like this. At that very moment, this one guy felt like he literally doubled over in pain. And this has happened to him before. And so he's like reacting to this sensation that's going on. And these are things that don't make the episode. So I have this kind of like, what's going on? What was that sound in the tree line? This guy's doubling over in pain. All of a sudden gets this massive headache. He's experienced this before and it's affecting him.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing I asked him, I'm like, do you have military connection in your background? That's another commonality. Mostly it's Navy.
Really?
Navy guys. Next is Navy, Air Force, then Army, then Marines. In that order is kind of boom, 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 boom. But there's just certain little check marks now when I meet somebody who have both UAP, UFO experiences and paranormal things going on. I know kind of what questions to ask. You're like, are you Irish, Scottish descent? Yep. Are you Yep. Are you? Yep, 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 yep. And you're like, okay.
No kidding. That's so interesting.
It's pretty fascinating. So, yeah, some of those experiments I question as well, just like you do, because I want to know. On the other hand, I'm glad they're doing it because it helps find certain answers that we wouldn't have otherwise had. Just like the landing site out there, that's an interesting spot. That's where my big sister and I, when we're kids, it was a typical Colorado spring day, where it's blue sky, sun shining, but there's snow on the ground. Mm-hmm. So we're at the ranch. We decide to go flip the Frisbee out front. We look down at the ground, and there's this perfect circle where the dirt was just dry. And on the outside is snow. Wet, heavy snow. And we're like, this is weird. Fast forward, my investigator brain, maybe there was a big silo sitting there, some other reason. There never was. There wasn't. But what's interesting now, fast forward to Beyond Skinwalker, they bring in the guys from Oak Island to do the, what is it called? The seismograph? The magnetometer.
Okay.
Drop that out. Anyway, they bring in the magnetometer.
Yeah.
And they do a scan over what they call the landing site now, where that big circle was.
Yeah.
And we have regular, normal readings going so far down, and then you get to a certain depth, and it just goes completely black. They can't get any readings there, right? Just only in that area. I'm like, have you ever seen this before? The guy was really nice. He's like, I've never seen this before. What is that? And what's really interesting in this briefing document, the investigators at the time in the late 70s went out and they measured this dry snowless circle. They said there were two on the property. My sister and I only remember the one right in front of the ranch house. Sure. But they were 75 feet in diameter. Okay. And the 75-foot in diameter snowless circle thing is coming up in multiple cases. And we just had recently on UAP Studies Podcast a Ph.D. who did his dissertation on this phenomenon. That was one of his findings, was a 75-foot diameter for landing sites.
Really?
Yeah. And I'm like, wow. So there's something to that. And what's interesting in the report here, it says that outside the snowless circle in the snow were drops of blood.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So, people sometimes will ask me, like, it's been over 50 years. Why are you still looking into this? It's still happening to this day. That's another thing Beyond Skinwalker did. I've got to meet a few of the locals that still have ranches out there to this day, and these things are still going on. Animal mutilations are still occurring. They're not being reported as much as they used to because they know after, decade after decade after decade, they just take a loss on these animals. It's a huge economic hit for them. They know nothing's going to happen for it, so they just don't even report it. They don't want the stigma and all this.
Sure.
Yeah. Have you heard about the 180 missing heads of cattle out?
I don't think that I have. Recently, no, I haven't heard about that.
Going on right now, out near the San Luis Valley, actually. And I think the vast majority of these missing heads of cattle are calves. So, and these are like branded and tagged and marked. And so I don't know if people are just stealing cattle or, cattle rustling. It's still going on. So that's a possibility. But there's a lot of head of cattle to go missing.
Yeah.
But yeah, mutilations are still occurring to this day.
That's, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Why do you think they're doing it?
That's a good question. And I stayed away from the mutilations for a long time because I'm like, oh man, first of all, it's kind of, an unpleasant thing to investigate. And there's been a number of researchers that have done a lot of work in the field. And, Linda Moulton Howe kind of started that. And then we had Chuck Zukowski did a lot of work, who was an ex-police officer, got into that.
Sure.
Christopher O'Brien was a really great guy, and he just recently passed away, but he wrote several books on the San Luis Valley, Mystery in the Valley. And in fact, we're kind of reopening. There's a famous Colorado case from 1967. It's Snippy the Horse.
Okay.
So yeah, we just recently acquired new information about this case from what is called the APRO files, the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization. They were missing for over 35 years. We just got our hands on them. And so there's a lot of misinformation about this historic case called Snippy the Horse. And we're going to be sharing that at Contact in the Desert this week and talking about that. But that's an interesting case. And it was out there in the San Luis Valley, 1967. But there's a lot of different types of evidence in that case. So I'm really looking forward to being able to share that publicly in photographs that have never been seen and things like that. But the animal deaths, it's not just cow, it's horse, it's sheep. It even found articles of dog. I think there's an elk connection, which we could talk about. I mean, it's just fascinating. Now, why are they doing it? I just recently heard somebody talking about copper in the blood, because these animals are drained of their blood.
Sure.
So they're bloodless. And we're talking 5-6 gallons of blood in these animals. These are heavy animals, cauterized, organs removed.
Very specific organs too.
Very specific organ. A lot of time the genital, the eye, the ear.
Yeah.
We have this weird cone of silence that happens around these mutilations. No tracks. Other animals or predators won't approach these mutilated animals. That's unusual. So many different unusual things. And for it to go on for decades and still not have answers to that, I don't know specifically what's going on, but I definitely think it's not. Back in the 70s, one of the theories was it were these satanic cults.
Mm-hmm.
No. I mean, even the sheriff, the undersheriff, the sheriff at the time in Elbert County was George Yarnell. The undersheriff was Bill Waugh.
Okay.
Bill Waugh, I flew to Florida and interviewed his son and his widow, Jean. And it was so cool. They this whole folder right here is just filled with, I think it's this one, or maybe it's this one. Jean Waugh collection. These were just all articles.
No kidding.
She had the original. She let me take them all back. From Colorado, from Elbert County. So like this one, sheriff says, who knows? Area residents theorize occultists to blame for livestock mutilations. But there's no way these cultists are flying around in these blacked out helicopters, mutilating all these cattle and not leaving any evidence behind. And not only that, but Bill Waugh's son and stuff. So in Elbert County, in the police department, they had a big map, and they were trying to pin mutilations as they were occurring because it was happening daily. I mean, Elbert County got hit the hardest. So you would have a mutilation happening in Elbert County and then a mutilation happening near Malmstrom, like in Montana, at the same time. And they would track them. And it was all through, like from Montana to Wyoming to Colorado, Texas, Oklahoma. Colorado was hit the hardest.
But definitely not a small little cult that's doing this. Yeah.
What's interesting, when I interviewed Bill Waugh's widow, Jean, they would go out and they were told by NORAD, the head of NORAD and the Air Force Academy, and the Colorado Bureau of Investigations was involved, to downplay what was going on because people were getting panicked. They thought they were going to go to humans next. Ranchers were arming themselves. They had, at the time in the late 70s, they had a $10,000 reward to catch these mutilators. So, just think about that. You have the ranchers out there in Elbert County, like sky watching every night, like, we're going to catch these. This is going on for 3 years. Oh, we're going to catch these guys. And so, like, the governor And Colorado Bureau, like, we need to downplay this because it's going to get ugly. You know,
Sure.
We don't want anybody shot or hurt or anything. But we've never been able to solve what's going on, and it's still happening. One of the old-time ranchers, I'll just say his first name, Carl, who had, animals mutilated in the 70s, also has cattle up in Woodland Park, Colorado, near where I live now. For 3 consecutive 4th of Julys in a row, he's had a mutilated cow under power lines. We just did an episode on it. I have a little YouTube channel called Rocky Mountain Ranch Research with Paige on YouTube, where I go on location and I try to answer these questions. And we went out to the location, and it's really close to Red Rocks campground. So you have this campground right here. He has cattle that he keeps out there, and it's under power lines. No helicopter, no airplanes are going to come and lift these cattle up and mutilate them and drop them back down. We have, just like with Snippy the horse, broken legs, elk with broken legs, all these things. It's like they're being picked up and dropped.
Really?
Yeah. And then what was really interesting, 2 of my favorite mutilation interviews that I did, or, when I went out, Gene and Keith Waugh talked about their dad, Bill Waugh, the undersheriff, went out on a mutilation case. Same kind of thing, right? Your typical cauterized thing, organs removed, blood drained, no blood on the ground, no tracks. And the next day they go back to check on it. And this is miles off the county road. Dirt had been packed and shoved into the cattle. Like, what is that about? But my favorite case, I interviewed a family that is a multi-generational rancher out there in Elbert County, and she moved to Wyoming. So I drove to Wyoming to interview her. She went to Kiowa High School, got married right out of high school, which was pretty common back then, and they bought property out in Rama. So, and this is, again, miles off the county road. Her husband's on horseback checking the cows for calves, comes across a dead calf, and he said there were 4 cuts in a perfect square. The top of the fur was removed, but the skin was still there. He gets on his horse, goes back and gets my witness. They drive back in the pickup truck, which she said took 25 minutes or so. When they got back, that calf was cauterized, blood drained, organs removed, no tracks around the animal except for what he had left with the horse. Mm-hmm. No sounds. They felt like it was super eerie. They felt like they were being watched.
And just to confirm, when you say blood drained, I mean we're talking. There's not blood anywhere
blood.
you found.
No, it's not in the animal. It's not on the ground. It's gone.
Nope.
It's like they take the blood from these animals, and that's one of the theories. There's maybe copper in the blood that extraterrestrials need. I've heard theories that extraterrestrials absorb nutrients through their skin. Mm-hmm. So maybe they're taking those vital organs and it sounds crazy. I know.
I guess, yeah, we don't know. We'll find out someday, I'm sure.
But that one case, and what was cool on Facebook, she's like, "Hey, Katie, you're not going to believe this. I have the photographs of that calf, of it when it was mutilated." And then she sent photos too of what a calf looks like when a coyote jumps on and just tears at it. Like, they don't cauterize and pull.
No, they rip it.
They don't.
Everything.
It's just, yeah. So something's going on.
I tell you what, can you turn your mic a little bit towards you?
Yeah.
Sorry, that it wanders on its own. I apologize for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a weird one. Cattle mutilations, crop circles, things like that. You got to wonder what the point of it is. And of course, why do they drop it back? I mean, why not? I guess one of the biggest questions that I've always had is, if they are this advanced civilization, right, and they are coming to monitor us or do anything like that, first of all, why do they leave so much evidence? So like something like that, they could eject it out into outer space, but instead they just drop it back for us to find. That seems odd. And then you have times where, they're just completely visible, like they don't really care. And then the other thing that I've always had questions on is why do they crash so much? You know what I mean? Here we have airplanes that they crash on occasion, don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. But when we have multiple UFO retrieval programs, that tells me that it happens pretty frequently. And why is that to that advanced race that's checking in on us? So, I mean, what do you think about that?
I've heard different theories on that. I mean, of course, with the Roswell crash in 1947, we hear, radar's pretty new at this time, after World War II or during World War II. And somehow they weren't expecting it, and that we had a big electrical storm and it messed with the static electricity or something. I don't know. I agree with you. Like, it seems kind of nuts to me that they would come and crash. Yeah. However, I'm going to go down a whole other road here, but I just watched a Joe Rogan podcast.
Oh, I think the one that just came out?
Yeah. Well, they interviewed a guy. His name was Thomas Campbell, and he talks about we're living a simulation, right? So if you take a simulated reality viewpoint, you're like, are they just like, is this part of the game? And what he talks about on that podcast is like certain people are getting glimpses of this phenomenon, right? And it's to kind of crack open the people, like to bring forward this phenomenon so people are more open to it. But that's the question I've always had, like, why, if there's extraterrestrials, why won't they just say hello? I mean, are we children? We can't handle it. I mean, all those common theories, but I'm like, it just doesn't make sense to me. And it's a little frustrating, like, I don't know. Same with the Bigfoot phenomenon. Like, why is that so elusive too? However, I've interviewed and had some experiences of my own that I can't discount, with that. And I don't know what that is, if they're interdimensional or what's happening there, or maybe they're around and they're just out of our 5 sense reality. Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, it could be. It could be. It's funny because I was talking with another guest that I had, Clarissa Vasquez, and she's a paranormal investigator, and she's highly scientific. And what's very unique is the same things that you're talking about where the high strangeness happens. She brought up in one of the books that I have been reading recently, and it's the same thing, like electromagnetic fields, and they think that has something to do with what they're seeing. And so it all seems to be kind of related to some degree. We just can't piece it together, at least at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. I think, for a long time, people put them in different baskets, compartmentalize these different phenomena. And I'm happy now that we're seeing that, they are related. They do have commonalities, and that's kind of keeps me going. But the secretiveness, these programs, that's a real part of the puzzle too. And, I'm finding clues and hints to things that I never thought I would find. And I'm like, oh, now that makes a lot of sense, that a lot of this stuff is being covered up.
So how long do you think that these UFOs, how long do you think that they've been visiting us for?
Probably for millennia, since the beginning of time, most likely. Okay. You look at ancient paintings and even biblical writings and, different things. So I think there's been a presence for forever.
So I'm so happy that you brought up the ancient paintings, because to me, one of the most convincing aspects to this whole investigation, it's not, the video that I see or anything, because again, sometimes that stuff can be manipulated or faked. But when you see an ancient painting that was painted hundreds or thousands of years ago, and you're like, wait a minute, you know what I mean? It's very hard to disprove that. So I actually learned about this the other day. You are probably well familiar with this, but I printed it off just because, and for our viewers, I'll go ahead and I'll put it on the screen. So this was a church in Romania. Have you seen this one?
Oh, there's so many. Describe what it is.
Well, I'm going to show you a picture quick. So church in Romania, this is painted on the inside of the church. And it says, at least in this article from Yahoo News, reputable, I don't know, kind of questionable. They said that they dated it, they believe it, 1523 is when this was painted. Oh. And now you tell me what you see in that right there.
I see wow. It looks like a house to me. I don't have my glasses on.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It looks like a house with a UFO right over the top of it.
That is what I see as well. And the church is now some sort of museum, and they say that, they believe that was the religious, someone being lifted to the sky to go up to heaven. That's not what I see whatsoever. I see a cloud trail following this thing coming down from the clouds and hovering over this house. And of course, everyone that is watching or listening, you can make your own decision on that and put it in the comments. But it's stuff like this that I see, and I'm just like, come on, right there. I mean, that's evidence that people say doesn't exist.
Yeah.
All right. So you did bring up Roswell, and I think that is probably one of the biggest things that I mean, that was the point, right? That's what everyone talks about. That's really where a lot of this whole investigation began, was at Roswell. So tell me about government crash retrieval programs. So we've heard they're out there. I think there has been a few programs that people have admitted are out there. What's out there right now that you're aware of?
Well, I'm gonna take the Roswell and put a Colorado spin on it, a local
Please
spin.
do. I'd love
Let's do
to.
the local spin.
Yeah.
So going on about 4 years now, I was part of this special assignment team for MUFON back in the day, which is a small group from across the country. MUFON's worldwide, and a case came across, a Colorado case.
Okay.
And I'm not going to give it all away, but it's intriguing, and it's to me crazy. So there was a General Brigadier Arthur Exxon
Okay.
in Roswell, and he rumored that one of the bodies ended up in a mortuary outfit in Denver.
Get out of here.
Yeah. So get this. So we get this family in California. I'm not going to give names here. I can give one name. So her family and this mortician that lives in New Mexico at the time, he was a mortician in a mortuary outfit in Denver. Okay. And for decades, this vault sat in the back corner of this room at the mortuary where they stored the chairs. And he never really questioned it, didn't think there was a body in it or anything like that. Finally, he's inquisitive, and his name was Lou. And he's like, what's with this vault? Like, it's been sitting there for a long time. He goes, oh, the guy that owns the mortuary, which I know the name of, and that's a whole interesting story in it itself. But he said, there's a federal judge that has a hold on that body. And he's like, what? So the federal judge was appointed by Nixon. Okay. And turns out, so I went down to the Denver archives, started digging on this federal judge. First of all, I got to get to the crazy coincidence. So my mom at the time is in a assisted living off of Hampton.
Okay.
So she called it the home. The home asked me to go do UFOs 101 for the people, right?
Sure.
And so I went and gave this presentation. And after the presentation, I'm talking about this Brigadier General Arthur Exxon and President Eisenhower and Mamie Eisenhower and this case that I'm actively working, and this federal judge that has a hold on the body. And they're like, oh, want me to go get his widow? She's on the 5th floor.
Really?
Yeah. So I had 2 interviews with this federal judge's widow. I mean, what are the chances of that?
Yeah.
Long story short, find out, I'm up in his apartment meeting, talking with his wife, interviewing his wife. And turns out he's the crash retrieval specialist, not meaning UFOs, but aircraft crashes. I asked her, was your husband ever back and forth to New Mexico? All the time. He was the infectious disease specialist. So he was the judge that did all the work on the toxic shock syndrome. And he was also the one that did the big cleanup, the spill out here.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And all those reports are sealed for, I think, another 75 years.
Okay.
Turns out that the mortuary, there's a Fitzsimmons-Lowry connection. So we know that Lowry soldiers were out there at the Roswell crash.
Okay.
There's this federal judge connection. Then you throw in Eisenhower. So Mamie Eisenhower's from Denver. 3 doors down is the owner of this mortuary.
Really?
From Mamie. Yeah, right. The story's incredible. So I go to the Eisenhower archives and I'm pulling information about what I think's going on here, where this body went. I think I know where it went. I'm not going to give it away yet, but it would be the biggest story ever, right?
Sure.
But there's definitely a Mason connection, this federal judge connection. That's why I believe Roswell's real. And there is a Colorado connection. And I do believe one of the bodies came here. And I've had people I've talked to different people who've done a lot of work on the Roswell story and written book, like Kevin Randall and Don Schmidt. And I was talking to Don Schmidt, and I just asked him flat out, we had him out here as a guest speaker. I'm like, was there a Mason connection to this? And because it's not really well known. And he's like, yeah, there was. And then I'm on the right track. So that whole...
And we say Mason, we're talking about the Freemasons.
Freemasons, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
What would the connection be to?
Well, for this personal research I'm doing, all these people knew each other. Like, for example, this federal judge was a 33-degree Mason. So I knew the lodge that he went to. and Eisenhower had ties to, and the owner of the mortuary was also. So that's where the connections are, and I have proof of this.
Interesting.
So, and people were like, well, why would they hide a body just in a mortuary? Where would you hide a book? In a library?
Sure.
Why didn't they keep it at Fitzsimmons Lowry? I don't know. That's another question. And then why did they not bury it right away? So I even went down to the probate office because I'm like, okay, there was a hold on this. So there has to be a record of it. I'll go down to probate, see what I can find. Well, you need a name or a case number.
Oh, really?
I'm like, well, what would they have named this ET? But the judge or the mortician, so what he does, his name is Lou. His wife goes to Kansas to visit the family. He wrote this little pamphlet. I have it. And he called it his caper. He's going to pull this caper. And I went and interviewed with him a couple times in New Mexico. Shot him on film and everything before he passed away. And it was interesting. He relived it like a PTSD moment. But he pulls his caper because he was curious. He wanted to open the vault.
Yeah.
So in the middle of the night, he goes in, sneaks in, opens the vault. And it was a vault within a vault within a vault. He wasn't expecting a body to be in there.
Okay.
He wasn't into UFOs. He didn't know about Roswell. He was mortified when he saw there was actual body in there. So he opens it up. He said it was under 7 to 10 layers of formaldehyde cloth. And when he opened and viewed the body, he said it was child-sized. All the visceral was removed. Genitals were removed. Orifices for ears, so there were no ears. He drew sketches of what he saw. And my question was, well, if you thought this was an extraterrestrial from Roswell, why didn't you take pictures of what? But, his eyes are watering. He's mortified. He's shocked. He thought severely hydrocephalic child. He didn't think ET at the time.
Okay.
It wasn't until a few years later that him and his wife were hang gliding in Roswell that they just go to the museum. He hears of the rumored General Brigadier Arthur Exxon that, one of the bodies ended up in a mortuary outfit in Denver. And he went, ding, 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 ding. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
That's what I witnessed. And so he wrote this little pamphlet all about his little caper. And like I said, I went and interviewed him. And then the rest is history. I've been kind of collecting all these, how does the federal judge and Eisenhower and the lodge and all this coming together. And it's pretty convincing. I think one of the bodies ended up at Fitzsimmons Lowry because at the time it was one of the best hospitals. It's where Eisenhower stayed when he had his heart attack and that. And I think maybe they took one of the ETs to do a deep dive on an organ or something that was specialized here in Colorado. It would make sense to me that they would do that.
Well, I think they would use whatever resources they had. I mean, I know they probably didn't expect it, didn't prepare for it. And they're like, oh man, what do we do with this thing right here? So that makes sense.
Yeah. First time out here on Mugshot. Get the down low.
That's right. I appreciate that. So I tell you what, moving forward a little bit. So going back to, we talked about it a little bit, Bob Lazar. So Area 51, S4, and I know George Knapp. I mean, that was the big thing. I mean, he blew the case wide open. Do you believe that he's a legit whistleblower?
You're going to ask that hard question, aren't you?
Well, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because I've seen him on Jeremy Corbell's video that he did 2017. I mean, the guy seems legit. The stuff that he says, he talks about it the same way he did when he was younger. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any embellishment. He actually seems very annoyed that he's even doing this whole documentary. And so you can tell he's not really trying to get any fame out of it. On the flip side of it, though, if you do a deep dive into at least what's publicly known about Bob Lazar, he's got some questionable stuff in his background.
Very much so.
And so I guess the question is, is that legitimate? Did some sort of government program put that out there so people kind of shun him? Or
I kind of make it my policy not to kind of judge or make calls on other people like that. But,
Sure.
With Bob Lazar, I'm because of his sketchy involvements and past and stuff, I'm on the fence on that still. I go back and forth. And I, because of people like Richard Doty, do you know who Richard Doty is?
I don't.
So Richard Doty is a disinformant for the military. And he came in 1977 around the ranch. So he was kind of what was his name? There was a gentleman, what was his name from Dulce Base? Benowitz. What was his first name?
Paul.
So he started kind of manipulating a guy named Paul Benowitz, who was seeing things in the skies and believing they were UFOs. And it was his job to kind of feed him disinformation. Like, oh my gosh, you're onto some of these probably are UFOs. So much so that the guy ends up dying, taking his life. And then when I met Richard Doty, I asked him if he was aware of the ranch in Elbert County. And to my surprise, or maybe to my not so surprised, he was aware of it.
Oh.
So a lot of these people that are coming forward, if they have military ties, even like Lou Elizondo, I question, because these guys take oaths, right? They take that very seriously. And then all of a sudden we have this parade of all these guys coming out. And I mean, I love that that's happening. I think it's important. And I think there's some good things coming out from it. But I'm also not one to believe everything everybody says right out of the gates. Because if you go deeper and you look at who these people are connected to, they're kind of tied into like Hal Puthoff and people in the UFO game, like Bob Lazar and, George Knapp. And is it partially disinformation? I don't know. And then you have people, the little guys like me and others that are out there just living and breathing and doing work. And we're just you're not part of the game. So I think there's a game going on, and it might not always be up and up.
No, I would agree. I don't know. It's really hard to decipher who's legitimate and who's not.
Right.
Another example is Grush. What's his name? Dave Grush?
Grush.
I mean, he goes out there and he says in front of Congress all of the things that everyone wants to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I'm pretty good at reading people, and something doesn't strike me as right about. I personally, I think he's full of shit. That's just my 2 cents on it.
And that's the problem. That's the problem that's going on right now. I'm not going to say a name because I was somebody that will be interviewing soon. But I listened to his full, like a 2-hour, and I was questioning some of what I was hearing, which is unfortunate because what that does, I mean, it's hard enough now that we have CGI and all these fake videos out there, even with the drones. We don't know what's real, what's not real, what people are faking, what AI is making.
Yeah.
And then you have these people coming out that I don't know if we could believe what they're saying. On the other hand, I mean, through my research, I know something's going on. And for me, eventually, I'm no longer Colorado State Director. I handed that over to Seth Feinstein. So he's now Colorado State Director. I just was kind of wanting to go off and do my own thing with Rocky Mountain Ranch Research and kind of go on location and do these things. But what ended up happening for me, not that I've lost interest in whether UFOs are visiting Earth or aliens or the abduction phenomena or wherever you want to go. But for me, it became the people involved in this topic. And if there was nothing to this topic, these people wouldn't be involved, in my opinion. Like, I've been approached by different people in different ways, and I'm like, what is this about? What are they trying to... It's sort of like we're keeping an eye just so you don't say too much or you're saying the right thing. And some of these guys that are at the top of this field, I think, are being manipulated or played in that way,
No kidding.
And some of our greats have been played in kind of, and I'm always scared of that happening. Like somebody's going to come and give me this great big story. How do I know if it's legit or not? I don't know.
Do you have an example of that where someone had been played and then they realized that it was...
Yeah, that happened to Linda Moulton Howe, actually, with Paul Benowitz, and that she was kind of taken down this rabbit hole. And I love Linda. She's such a sweet lady, and she's done a lot of great work in the field, but she's been taking a time or two, shown images and put them out there. And, oh, do you know that was from a video game cover? And it's kind of a blow, like, oh, man.
Yeah.
But it happened.
Because then you lose some credibility as well, right?
Yeah. And Linda, I think she just gets inundated all the time. People just throwing her stuff all the time. She doesn't have time to do deep dives on all this stuff. Even a case that me and my partner did out here in Colorado with a military guy who just was moved out here with his family, drove out from the East Coast to go to the Air Force Academy, had an interesting sighting, very documented, claimed missing time, claimed all this thing. Me and my partner went out and interviewed him and his wife and his family, checked his vehicle, did all this stuff. We interviewed them separately, like by the book, kind of did this thing, checked out the receipts. There was no missing time. We actually for sure know that what he and his family saw was a reentry vehicle. I mean, location date. So we kind of We solved the case.
Sure.
Well, Linda took it because this guy claimed he had dreams of like squares and ones, kind of like the Rendlesham Forest thing where he was downloaded zeros and ones.
That's where they touched
secret
it,
message.
right?
She went and toured on this thing for a year. And I just had to shut my mouth because I knew that it was not true.
Sure.
But she just doesn't have the time or the resources to go do what we did. And at the time, I decided to just leave it lie. I didn't challenge her on it. I just left it. I have the folder on my computer actually of like, here's actually the case. But so that happens. It happens to the best of us, you know, and she's done a lot of great work. But unfortunately, if you get taken like that, it can really discredit you.
Sure.
You know, and a lot of people fall victim to that.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and, you know, of course, it sounds as though there's a lot of people intentionally trying to do that. I think there's a lot of mental illness out there as well. I mean, I've even met people when I was a cop that, man, they're dead set that they saw something. And yet you can kind of, if you investigate deep enough and you talk to them about what they're experiencing, you learn about their background. You know, maybe they have schizophrenia, but they haven't taken their medication in a certain amount of time. And, you know, you can be sensitive, but still inquisitive. You know what I mean?
I'm personally very sensitive to that topic. I have a half brother who was mentally ill, diagnosed schizophrenic. He was an arsonist, burnt down our house. Well, my mom was pregnant with me at the time in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin.
Really?
And then he burnt down our home here in Englewood in 1973 when I was a kid. So a lot of trauma in my life. He did a lot of bad things. And he was institutionalized at Pueblo State. Again, he's a half-brother, but he was also off the charts a genius. The letter he left in the fire was very cryptid, talking about the halls of his memory and all this. So what I say about, and we do have a small percentage in reading letters for years like I did and talking with witnesses and people, you can kind of tell pretty quick, just like when you're a police officer, if you're dealing with somebody that has mental illness issues, right? I mean, you can tell by the writing, you could tell just in
their mannerisms.
The mannerisms. So that being said, knowing what I know about all the studies, Ph.D. studies done with disassociation, mental illness, and the phenomenon, doesn't discount the experiences they've had. They could be predisposed to having this thinning of the veil or having experiences. I mean, studies have shown this. It even started studying this with Sigmund Freud, was looking at disassociation and these types of occurrences.
Sure.
So even kids with autism on the spectrum, passive development disorder, you're seeing kids that are getting really highly tuned into utilizing certain parts of their intuitive side instead of their material side. So you'll see autism kids that can see people's, aura colors or different things like that. And that's where the trauma piece picks up. And I think that played a role for me. My father was an alcoholic and very abusive. So when you are dealing with a schizophrenic brother who's an arsonist and breaking glass and an alcoholic father and things get violent, you learn to tune into that intuitive side at a very young age. Probably from birth for me, I learned to read people's faces and pick up on subtle energies and these kind of things. And it plays a role in these kind of phenomena because I see it time and time and time again. And it's not always trauma. It can be those other things we talked about earlier, like, near-death experience or meditation or remote viewing, things like that. But when you learn to follow that intuitive side, so go back to Rocky Mountain Ranch, and I look at Greg, and I'm talking to Nicole, who grew up on the ranch, and I'm like, have you seen shadow figures? Do you have paranormal things? Yes, 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 yes. She's more intuitive. Where Greg, who's like, I really haven't seen anything. Well, because he's just building and tinkering and he's not paying attention. He's not tuned in to what's happening around him. Interesting, though, enough, just recently, this last summer, we went back and wanted to kind of recreate some of the things they were doing on Beyond Skinwalker, put the drone up, fully charged, less than 2 minutes, it was 100% drained.
Really? How long's a typical charge typically last?
On that particular drone, because it's not a professional drone, I want to say it was 15, 20 minutes. Is that about right? 15, 20 minutes. The other weird thing was, so we plugged it back into the vehicle to recharge it. It charged extra fast too, which is kind of funny.
That's interesting.
But then we flew it again and it acted normal. So the phenomenon seems to be a little transient in nature. But yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting with people. I brought this up in an earlier podcast, but I'll bring it here as well. When you look at victimizers, a lot of times they will look for what they call the perfect victim. And that's someone that, may be autistic, or someone that's a prostitute or something like that. And then you can go and do whatever you want to that person. And then when they go and they say, oh, this happened to me, it basically, it puts question marks out there as to, well, did it really? You have schizophrenia, or, you claim that you were sexually assaulted, but you're a prostitute. So there's something else?
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean they weren't victimized. And so in a situation like this, again, someone could have mental illness, but that doesn't mean that they weren't taken, or that doesn't mean that they didn't have those experiences.
Right.
And so trying to decipher can be tricky, but it's something that I think, at least on the police side of things, we've really become very keen on trying to hone in on. So if someone is like at risk and they claim something, even though on its face it might be, really, you dig deeper to see exactly what could have happened, because they could be the victim that has really been victimized.
Yeah, and my research is kind of showing that the gentleman on the property who came from San Francisco claimed to be part of the Air Defense Command and a psychologist. It's a long kind of story. I won't get into the whole thing here, but we do have evidence from the archives that there was a soldier. His name was Warren. His last name was redacted out. He said, Warren from Camp Carson visits the ranch. Felt something wrong, walked into the woods, like something controlled his mind, made him walk towards the woods, would release him, and he would run back to the ranch house. And this did this to him 5 times, as if some sort of mind control. Many of these adults saw these weird boxes like this, that illuminated some sort of like buzz or hum sound or bee sound. Very unusual.
In a physical box.
Physical box.
Okay. They see it while it's walking out there?
Yeah, I saw it in the daytime. Me and the youngest son and my mom's boyfriend were in the pickup truck. We stopped to get something out of the little shed, and we were going to just drive around the Ponderosa Pines in the back of the house. I don't know why. I don't know if it was the box that made him pull the truck over, but all of a sudden you heard this electrical, like bee sounding, like bee sound. And me and Scotty are in the back of the truck, and we're looking at this box, and it was 3.5, 4 feet off the ground by the tree.
Really?
And Jack started screaming, it's the box, get in the truck, get in the truck, get in the truck. We jump in the truck, turn around, that box was gone. It just wasn't there.
Nope.
And these boxes show up, and now I'm seeing them in different, there's the Carl Higdon case. I'm out in Medicine Bow, Wyoming. He had an interaction with the box, and he was out elk hunting. Just different things showing up, boxes. So I don't know what this box is. Is it something that we're back engineering or experimenting with? Is it extraterrestrial in nature? But many adults saw this thing. So we know, we have soldiers from Camp Carson. We have this strange character in the story, John, who could be MK Ultra. But then I have my brother, and I'm wondering if that's how we tie into the story. At the time, my brother is in Pueblo State Hospital. And we know at the time, especially, in the 60s and 70s, they're using people from state hospitals to do these different programs on.
Sure.
And in the reports, it states that this character from the ranch, there's vagrants and visiting the ranch. Why?
Yeah.
Why? What are they doing out there? That's part of the puzzle. And also, from my perspective, I'm a young girl, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. One of the things we were really studying in MK Ultra was trauma and fear in children. So that was going on at the same time. So there's that kind of connection piece. I'm like, that's really interesting. On that scary night with the disembodied electrical voice, it was the boys' mother's birthday. They're in the front room playing. Me, my sister, and the 3 boys are hanging out, and the kids, that hum sound started up. Okay? And then the power goes out in the house. The brightest light I've ever seen is through the boys' window. We're all freaking out, flashlights, candles. That's when that disembodied electrical sounding voice, it sounded like it came from every orifice of the house. And it said, and the reason I know what it says, is it's, the quote is in this report. And when I read this and I called my sister, she had like a PTSD reaction to it too. And I've recreated the voice, but basically it said, "Attention, we have allowed you to remain. We have interfered with your lives very little. Don't cause us to take action in which you will regret. Your friends will be instructed to remain silent concerning us."
Really?
And that night, when I got back home to Inglewood, I went into the front door, I fell on the floor, went paralyzed, I couldn't speak. And that night I had my first full-blown migraine headache, like the vomiting, the tunnel vision, all of it. Started suffering super bad migraine headaches from that time on. So much so that, I don't know, 2-3 months later, I end up in this biofeedback program with the person who invented kind of like the Gateway program, who I come to find out just recently worked at Area 51. And he started biofeedback in the Denver Tech Center with the tapes and all that. And I did that for a year. Every week they'd hook me up. I would learn to lower and raise my body temperature, all this stuff through biofeedback. And I'm like, was that connected to what was happening at the ranch? Because it was going on at the same time.
That's interesting.
Isn't that wild? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's true. I'm just saying, could be likely in what I'm uncovering.
Well, and so when you think back to that night, I mean, with what you just told me, that tells me that something happened and now they're putting a warning out there.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, what do you think it was that prompted that response? Because it almost seems like if you guys were just living life, you know, you're enjoying it, there's nothing weird. If they come and they start doing that to you, all of a sudden that's going to raise more question marks than were ever there before. But you had mentioned that you heard some whispering from your mom, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'd hear, you know, police being called or animal mutilations being done. I didn't know it at the time when I was little. I know it now that these mutilations were going on all across Elbert County. So the thing that baffles me the most is that property sat vacant for over 10 years.
Really?
If the government or military wanted it to do these experiments, why would they allow it to be sold to the family? You know, my mom's boyfriend. And another interesting piece of that puzzle, and, you know, I laugh about it now kind of, but at the time, so the people that own the ranch, my mom's boyfriend was still married and they were supposed to get a divorce. Jack and Betty, they're all passed away. So I feel I can at least say their first names now.
Sure.
They never got divorced. They never got divorced until the end of their lives. So my mom dated this guy during those ranch years. And I feel like we were unwitting participants in some weird. And the guy that was dating Betty, the boyfriend of Betty, was the guy, the soldier from San Francisco that was part of Air Defense Command.
Yeah.
So were we just unwitting because of the fire and because of my brother in Pueblo State? This guy that befriends my mom just shows up at her work, you know, and they start, you know, he buys her ice cream and they start dating. And the next thing you know, we're at the ranch and all this stuff's happening.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I'm kind of piecing all that together now. And that's why I said earlier, like, if some of these programs through state hospitals and, you know, if we were part of that in some weird way, just a little plea, like, that's a problem.
Sure.
Like, and I'm angry about it. And when I went to film for Beyond Skinwalker, the directors, I think they wanted a different reaction than what they got. They wanted, you know, crying and, oh, I'm so scared and oh my God. But what I felt instead was like this powerful, like, okay, I'm back and I'm not afraid of you anymore. So that was kind of funny.
Good for you, though.
Yeah, but that radio experiment that you see where I'm on yeah, that was insane. And what's really cool about that whole segment,
that's where it responded. You would talk and
they didn't show like everything that happened, which surprised me. I'm like, why didn't you show everything? That happened 4 different times. So I did it the 2 times, and then they're like, you got to get, was it Paul that was outside and Nicole back in, they've got to see this. So I repeated it. And then they'd also have, what was his name? Jer, I think, was the ham radio operator.
Oh, okay.
They had him try to do it again. Nothing. Only when I would get on there. And then for season 3, I can't talk a lot about it because it hasn't come out yet, but I talked my sister into going back with me to the ranch. So she goes back for the first time. And they repeat that. We get interesting results, different, but interesting. What's fascinating, down, there was some equipment, I don't know if it was like CB equipment or whatever. What was coming through at the time, we were getting like disembodied, like EVPs coming through some equipment saying, we're back. And then we heard something about the Vietnam War, and I'm like, wait a minute, why would they'd be talking about the Vietnam War. And then while this is going on, in the old part of the house where they have the old crystal radio and the old time radios, they're getting clicks that they can't explain. And they sent it to Travis Taylor. It's like almost a Morse code. It's like, that is strange. There's a lot of this anomalous activity going on out there. Something that hasn't aired yet, but I think I can talk about it a little bit.
Okay.
I had an injury that first season that wasn't aired where it looks like a radiation burn or a handprint on my back. I can show you the picture.
You're kidding me.
No.
And that didn't air?
No, they didn't. They filmed all that. It didn't air it. It was hot to the touch. It blistered. It looks like it was right here on my back. I'll send you the picture if you want to add it to this.
Oh, I would love to. Yeah.
But the second season, which now is going to be on the third season, they set up a table to do a nighttime experiment at the landing site where that big snowless circle is. So it's my sister, me, the crew. Hillary had just put brand new microphones in all our mics. So everybody was at 100% charge. And it's a little cold out there, but I'm standing there trying to tough it out. But I'm feeling like 10,000 knives coming down on my body. And I couldn't not say anything anymore. I went completely pale. Yeah. And so they sit me down. I think this will be in episode 3. I don't know if it'll be in there. I kind of hope it won't be in there because it wasn't my best moment. Like I'm having a medical emergency. My battery went from 100% to 50%. Everybody else has stayed at 100%. I went pale. My blood pressure shot up. I started shaking. They walked me back to the barn. From the time I went from where the circle is to the heated garage because they wanted to warm me up.
Yeah.
It went from 50 to nothing. 100% battery drain. Just on me. Everybody else's was fine. My sister's freaking out. They had to med me back to Castle Rock. I couldn't finish the night.
Really?
I felt so bad because they had spent all this time in equipment, but it was right there at the landing site where they had the anomalies with the drones and stuff like that. So you see that episodes where the rockets go up and it kind of does this and it falls. It's that same place that I had that.
Did you hear that hum when any of that was going on?
Nope.
It was really interesting. At the end of that episode, Travis Taylor, he mentioned something to the effect of that hum could be some sort of like defense system activating, and that's what was shooting the rockets that you're talking about. And I'm just curious because there has been technology that we've experimented with, and who knows what they have behind closed doors.
That's what somebody said about the thing on my back was that, I mean, but
they're hitting you with something, right? Like
hit me with something like that. Like if I end up being medically injured because of that or something, that's a huge liability. I can't imagine they would do that. And then I have the people saying, that's the night of the big blizzard. So we're going out. It's not in the episode either. The reason we were walking back, that where it's blizzarding and we see the footprints come out of the ground and disappear.
Yeah, that stops. Yeah.
Yeah. The reason we were walking back out there is us taking them where I saw the box in the daytime. See, but that didn't make it the episode because I didn't talk about the box. But that's why we're walking back there. And we see those footprints come out. And as we're going, so there's barbed wire fence right there. And I'm not prepared. I mean, I knew we were going to get a little bit of snow, but not the blizzard we had. So I'm wearing blue jeans and I fell forward in the snow. My jeans were soaking wet. I was freezing cold. So people assume that whatever this was on my back was negative or bad or something's attacking me. I didn't feel that way. I didn't even notice it till the next day. We had off filming. My daughter came. We went to Red Robin. I'm just like, man, something's bothering me. Back up to my room, and that's when I saw the injury. So I let the film crew know right away and have it documented and all that. But I don't think that it was necessarily anything attacking me or negative or demonic in any kind of way. I mean, maybe it was trying to help me up from when I fell over the barbed wire. Like, poor woman, let me help you up. But yeah, it was just very strange. But it scared my daughter. We went to King Soopers. We bought a white candle and like love and light, like just in case. Like I don't want anything negative attached to me, like the skinwalkers at the Pentagon. So you have to be careful with this.
Sure.
And the fact that now both times I've been back on the ranch, something physically negative has happened. So that scares me a little bit.
Yeah. How often do you go up there?
Not very often.
Not very often.
Yeah. I mean, I know Greg and, but he lives there. It's his private home. He just lost his wife and, he works hard and I don't want to be bugging him. Can I come back to the ranch and do another experiment? But he's we can go out there, when he asks, he's been very gracious in letting us go and test and do whatever we want, go out there and do that. But I just don't want to
overwhelm him.
Yeah.
Or overstay your welcome.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I tell you what. So I did put information out there that you're going to be on the podcast, and I asked if anyone had any questions. I'm going to give you a fan question. This is actually a two-parter from, I hope I pronounced this right, Emanuela A. So, have you noticed any patterns or trends in the sightings you have researched?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, they do kind of come in waves. The state of Colorado falls, obviously, for obvious reasons. We have more sightings in certain highly populated areas. So, city of Denver, Wyoming, you don't get very many. So, obviously, they go with populations. But I do notice in these high strangeness locations that they tend to come in 6 to 7 year kind of ebbs and flows, little waves.
Really?
And I was talking to, was it James Keenan that actually came out? I'm not taking credit for this. Is James Keenan was tracking that and watching that a little bit. And they kind of tend to ebb and flow with solar cycles.
Interesting.
So, and right now,
like a solar flare.
Yeah. So right now we're in a high solar cycle.
Okay.
So the magnetism hitting the Earth is higher than normal. So when you see things hitting higher than normal, the activity tends to go up.
Wow. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. The other question that he had, what are your thoughts on recent government reports on UFOs, and what do you think they mean for the future of UFO and UAP research?
Yeah. I mean, we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. I know, just like with the recent video that dropped of the egg, and who couldn't go, nanu. But there seems to be a tendency to over-criticize, over-judge, over-speculate, and I tend to want to just kind of sit on the sidelines and see where it goes. I mentioned I'm not overly trusting of what's coming out, so you got to look at these men and women who are coming forward and who they're connected to and why and what the end game. Even with our hearings,
Sure,
we're making these tiny little steps, but they're not as much as I would like to see. However, at least we're having the discussion of declassifying things older than 15 years. At least NASA's kind of starting to talk about, at least we're having a discussion. So to me, having the discussion is the first step.
Mm-hmm.
But I would just say for any of your listeners to do your own research, follow your own gut, your intuition, and don't believe everything you're hearing, because there have been some that believe in maybe a false flag, and I don't like going down the conspiracy rabbit holes, but you just have to be discerning on what the motive might be. And at the end of the day, I also believe that there's some technologies we don't want to give away the farm. We don't want all that out. If we do have some great type of technology or some great weapon or aircraft or something, we don't want to let China or somebody know that. So I understand the reason for secrecy too.
Sure.
So when, they talk about going into skiffs, there's a reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if somebody out there knows for sure that there is an ET presence, we can handle it. Let us know.
Yeah.
There's that's not a little thing. That's a big thing. But I think we're ready to hear that if that's true. So I think there's a way to do it, letting us know without giving away all of our secrets.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that. I think we're past the point. Anything about aliens is so influenced in our culture anymore. I mean, I'm a huge Star Wars guy, Star Trek, you watch it, all that stuff's in there. And I think we're past the point of really there being, don't get me wrong. If aliens landed tomorrow, you're going to have a small percentage of the population that do something crazy, because that's just how it is. You're going to have a small percentage of the population that, maybe they start looting or rioting or whatever. But for the rest of us, I think life will go on. It's just, tomorrow's Friday. That's what it would be, right? Or Saturday.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times we'd have certain speakers talk and they'd talk about S4 and like what I told you, they absorb nutrients. I'd be hearing these mind-blowing things from people that I think are credible, right?
Yeah.
And then and then I leave this 2-hour, 3-hour meeting and mom calls on the phone. Oh, by the way, can you stop at Walmart and pick up my medicine? and some creamer for my coffee. And I'm like, okay, I just heard all this crazy stuff. But at the end of the day, I have to go get creamer and medicine for my mom. Life goes on. You go back to work. Like, so you're right about that. Like, and I think we've seen that time and time again with just these last 6-7 years, this information slowly coming out, and people pay attention for like a minute. And then they're like, squirrel, on to the next thing, They don't care.
They'll watch it for a few seconds on TikTok.
It's like flash forward 3 minutes, done.
Yeah. Do you ever go to those like UFO conventions or whatever that they have?
Yeah, I'm often a speaker. So I'll be speaking at Contact in the Desert out in California. Yeah. And then I'll be speaking in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I believe it's in April. If you go to the New Mexico Explorations Conference. So, and Richard Doty will be there. So that'll be interesting. Our disinformation officer. So I can't wait to corner the guy.
No, I'll have to go to one of those. I'm really curious. I've never been to anything like that. Do you meet a lot of unique individuals at those conferences?
A lot of just what we're doing right now. You'd be surprised. A lot of regular, normal people. Just having this conversation. So it's not like tinfoil hat,
I was curious.
Yeah, it's not. No, not at all.
Good.
I would like, if you don't mind, I just want to tell you if I can show 2 things.
I want you to. Yeah.
So one of my favorite, and this goes to this, pieces of information through my reports was a aircraft crash or multiple interceptors that crashed in Elbert County, November 11th, 1975.
Okay.
In Dr. Sprinkle's archives, it said 2 interceptors were in pursuit of a UFO over Elbert County and crashed.
Really?
I'm like, oh my gosh, what's that about, right? So, did some digging on that. And out of Buckley Air Force Base, 2 A-7Ds were scrambled. They're over basically in between Kiowa and Elizabeth. And when I FOIA'd, it was actually Richard Doty, by the way, who told me to FOIA the mishaps office from Malmstrom.
Okay.
Or no, Kirkland Air Force Base. And I get the report back, this is the report about the crash. And as you can see, right, we get a lot of the nice redacted things. But look at this one right here. This is the transcripts. But supposedly, according to this report, it was an instructor and a student. They had 218 live rounds of ammunition on board. The instructor misidentifies the beacon of another aircraft that was never identified in this whole report of what this other aircraft was, and hits the tail of the student. Both pilots ejected, both pilots survive. But what's interesting in this report is they talk about the instructor loses 8 of his instrumentation panel. So my son, who just recently graduated from Spartan Aviation, I'm like, what do these 8 functions have in common? They could all be affected by static electricity, just like as well.
Okay.
So I think there's more to the story than meets the eye. So what's really fascinating about November 11, 1975, this right here, I think it's right here, there's another incident out of Falcon Bridge, Ontario, November 11th, 1975. The Air Force admits scrambling 2 F-106 Delta Darts in pursuit of a UFO. Same day.
Yeah.
So out of Selfridge, Michigan, they're tracking multiple UAPs on radar. They're going from 26,000 feet up to, I think it was 74,000 feet, just straight up. Multiple witnesses, many police officers on the ground, civilian witnesses, military men and women are seeing these things, so they decide to scramble these Delta Darts over. They're going 35 nautical miles over the Great Lakes. So they admit to doing this, scrambling over UAPs. So then I'm at a conference, Contact in the Desert, and I'm talking to Travis Walton. Travis Walton had an abduction experience we talked about earlier in 1975. He was returned right after midnight on November 11, 1975 in Snowflake, Arizona.
Really?
And then as I'm talking to Travis about these 2, all these interceptors, he's like, you know what else happened November 11th, 1975? I'm like, no, what, Travis? He said the Edmund Fitzgerald goes down in the Great Lakes 29 men go missing off the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Really?
November 11, 1975.
That's wild.
So when we were just recently at the archives in Richard Haynes' material, because he has them all wonderfully organized, I pull 1975, November 11th, see how many aircraft sightings, commercial, and there was a time from October, I think it started October 8th to November 11th, there was a huge wave of UFOs sightings from multiple aircraft, not just these two. So now I'm in the process of gathering more cases from commercial aircraft. I think one was a United flight, actually. So
during that time, was it a high solar?
I don't know. I haven't checked that yet, but I will.
Yeah, I would just be curious if that's one of the things that maybe is helping see. And that's crazy that all this is going on.
So I wanted to share that. Can I
ask one thing? So a lot of the one that you showed was redacted. Mm-hmm. Did you ever have you ever pulled like a regular plane crash that had nothing to do with UFOs to see how much of that is actually redacted?
I did. Well, yeah, I actually did this. So because Kiowa is a pretty, Elbert County, Kiowa, Elizabeth's a pretty small town, small area. So what I did do, my son actually told me, well, you can go check the database for all different crashes, airline crashes, and their causes. So I went and I did that. So I did 15 years before the 70s when we had all the high strangeness, and then after, just to compare, if we had a height in airline crashes and deaths and stuff. Sure enough, we did. During that activity of the mutilations, there was a significantly higher amount of aircraft incidents. And I also come to find out through all this research that for a short time, during Linda Moulton Howe's investigations out there, they put a no-fly zone over the county.
Really?
Yeah, over Kiowa. So they were really monitoring.
It was because they were monitoring. That's why it was a no-fly zone.
And then also in the notes, it says the NORAD head or Air Force head has a directive to handle all UFO reports and Bigfoot. Which brings me to the last thing I wanted
to please do.
Done. So one of the most mind-blowing things I came across in all this research, let me take that letter.
Yeah.
So there was a sketch of the Bigfoot creature seen on the ranch, the Rocky Mountain Ranch.
Really?
Which is interesting because I had Bob Solis confirm that there were men stationed at Malmstrom and at the Air Force Academy seeing similar creatures, and they were almost identical. So this was the creature, this was the Bigfoot that was in the files from the 70s.
Oh, look at that. Okay.
But what's more incredible, and I never witnessed this, I never claimed to see ETs out on the Rocky Mountain Ranch, but this is something they don't talk about on Beyond Skinwalker. There were two types of ETs supposedly out on the ranch. Nordics, the blonde, blue-eyed Nordics, and these, Paul Giamatti, because I went on Paul Giamatti's show, and he named them Tubi guys. So in the archives, there was a sketch of the Tubi guys. This is what was in the file.
Oh.
Tubi guys. So I didn't show this around to very many people because he's kind of unique, right? Wrinkles, heavy brow, smaller eyes.
But still has kind of the alien look underneath.
So at the time, I was the guest speaker coordinator for Colorado MUFON, and I invited a gentleman by the name of Sean Bartok, who wrote a book called Flashbacks about his ranch in Castle Rock. Come to find out, his ranch was only 14 miles away from my ranch in my childhood. And I'm sitting there watching his presentation, and up comes this picture right here. This is the picture he shows.
No kidding.
Okay, so 14 miles away, this is the guy from our ranch. This is the guy from his. He said, you see these tubes? He said, they come out. So he shows me this drawing. This is in his book too, by the way. We didn't know each other.
Really?
At all. So this is his second drawing of the tubes out.
Holy crap.
Yeah. And so I'm thinking, are these guys, this is just my theory, are these guys AI and the blonde, blue-eyed Nordics are not AI? And it says in the reports that they were in conflict with one another.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. And so was that what this was about? Are these guys connected to the boxes? Are these guys connected to the animal mutilations? I mean, we have also one out of Medicine Bow in Wyoming. But yeah, I mean, what are the chances? Look how similar. I overlaid them. Like, you're a police officer, you took one on top of the other. They're pretty similar.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That could be a composite sketch of like a suspect. Absolutely.
Isn't that insane? I mean, I don't know. It's just so, yeah. So I was at the grocery store and there was a Popular Mechanics on AI and they had all these tubes and stuff. Maybe that's what that is. Maybe they're here because they know we're headed down that path of AI, and maybe the Nordics don't want us to go down that road. And to be guys like, maybe
Or
they're
maybe
us
the Nordics created them.
yeah, or maybe they're us from the future.
Yeah.
You know, because that's what Dr. Mike Masters talks about. You know, these guys are us from the future. But those are just, you know, it would be one thing if all these stories just came from, you know, that mysterious guy, John. But I have a spreadsheet of over 250 people that experienced things during this time. So it wasn't just a story coming from one guy. This is the whole county.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
so something was going on.
Absolutely.
No question about it.
Well, when they're coincidental like that, I mean, it's one thing if someone sees this and someone sees that, but that's
it's
pretty damn identical.
Yeah, and the more I dig, the more I get just mind-blowing information like this. So
That's,
you know.
well, I'm so happy you shared that.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, so we'll go ahead, last note. So what is next in the works for you? I think I read earlier, so you're writing a book right now.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? So
yeah, a
what's
couple of them. Yeah.
Okay, so what's the next one looking like, if you can share that?
Yeah, so I mentioned it before. Or do you want me to say your name? Because I never know. So Tony Angiola is writing a book for the King family, which is the original Snippy the Horse. So it's Snippy the Horse, a King family legacy, which is going to be sharing all the new information and facts that the APRO reports holds on the historic 1967 Colorado Snippy the Horse case. So that'll be out in May of this year. I'll be speaking at Contact in the Desert in Albuquerque, working on the Rocky Mountain Ranch book. We're have other few book projects in the works. There's just so many moving pieces to this that, you know, I'm doing more digging on this November 11th and just keep following the clues, I guess, like a good detective would.
Well, I think you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming on our podcast today. I mean, this has been amazing. It's been very eye-opening. I didn't know a lot about this stuff in Colorado. You know, you always hear the global perspective, but you don't hear the local stuff.
Colorado is a hot spot. And if you guys want to go experience something, go out to San Luis Valley and just look at the skies. You will see stuff. And I also just want to just share with your listeners, if you can go to Rocky Mountain Ranch YouTube channel with Katie Paige and to give me a like and a subscribe, that would be helpful, because I'm trying to go out there. I sat behind the microphone and which I love. I love meeting people and sitting face to face, but I wanted to get out there and visit these locations. So take all you guys along with me on that podcast, and that helps me out if you just give me that thumbs up, that like. So
absolutely, yeah. So viewers, listeners, please go out there, look at the YouTube. And again, what was the link again? Or
it's Rocky Mountain Ranch Research with Katie Paige on YouTube.
Bam. Take a watch, give a like and subscribe. Will help Katie out. And Katie, thank you again for coming on today.
Yeah.
And we'll look forward to doing it again soon.
That's great. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Mugshot Podcast. Like and subscribe where you can, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.